Imagine a box, a glass and aluminum box, roughly 4 feet in diameter, that is smaller than the back seat of a Volkswagen Beetle. Now imagine stepping inside. You don't sit in a chair. There is no room for a chair. You curl your body into a fetal position. Your knees are pressed against your ears. Your back is against a cold steel plate. The hatch is closed above you. It is sealed tight. Now take that box and hang it underneath the belly of a 30-ton bomber. Fly it up to 25,000 feet. The temperature outside drops to 60 degrees below zero. If your electrically heated suit fails, your blood will literally freeze in your veins within minutes. The oxygen is so thin that if your mask comes loose, you will pass out in 30 seconds and die shortly after. Welcome to the Sperry Ball turret. During World War II, this was widely considered the worst job in the American military. They didn't put the officers down here, they put the smallest guys they could find. Usually teenagers. Kids who were barely old enough to drive a car now suspended in a fishbowl 5 miles above the earth. From inside this bubble, you have a perfect view. You can see the clouds. You can see the curvature of the earth. And you can see the German fighter planes coming to kill you. And here is the terrifying part. You are the only person on the entire plane who cannot wear a parachute. There is simply no room for it inside the ball. You have to leave it in the fuselage just outside the turret door. So, picture this scenario. The engines are on fire, the wing is shearing off. The pilot gives the order to bail out. Everyone else on the crew grabs their chutes and jumps. But you have to manually hand crank the turret until the door aligns with the fuselage. You have to climb out of the ball. You have to find your parachute in the chaos of a spinning, burning aircraft. You have to put it on. And only then can you jump. If the gears of the turret are jammed by enemy fire, you are trapped. You become a passenger in an aluminum coffin, screaming all the way down to the ground. Thousands of young men died exactly like this. But for those who survived the cold, the lack of oxygen, and the terror of being trapped, there was another problem. A problem so frustrating, so poorly designed, that it made fighting back almost impossible. You see, these gunners were supposed to be the guardians of the flying fortress. They were equipped with twin 50 caliber machine guns that could shred a fighter plane in seconds. But there was a flaw. A massive, fundamental flaw in the way the engineers designed the aiming system. The boys in the turrets weren't missing their shots because they were scared. And they weren't missing because they were untrained. They were missing because the smartest engineers in America had built a machine that was physically painful to use. To understand why this was such a disaster, we have to look at the technology itself. The Sperry Corporation was a titan of industry. They built the gyroscopes that kept ships steady. They built the autopilots that kept planes level. When they designed the ball turret, they treated it like a mathematical problem. The result was the K4 computing gun sight. On paper, it was a masterpiece. It was an analog computer designed to do the math for you. It calculated wind speed, the velocity of your plane, and the bullet drop. All the gunner had to do was frame the enemy fighter in the reticle and the machine would handle the rest. But there was a catch. A massive ergonomic nightmare of a catch. To use the sight, the gunner had to press his face against a rubber eyepiece. He had to close one eye and squint through a series of lenses with the other. Think about that for a second. You are in a vibrating metal ball. The 50 caliber machine guns next to your ears are firing 14 rounds a second. The entire airframe is shaking violently. And in the middle of this earthquake, you are trying to keep your eye glued to a small piece of glass. If your head moved even a fraction of an inch, you lost the picture. If the sun hit the lens at the wrong angle, the reticle washed out and became invisible. But the biggest problem was biology. Human beings are predators. We have binocular vision. We evolved to hunt by using both eyes to track motion and judge depth. The Sperry engineers took that evolutionary advantage and threw it in the trash. By forcing the gunner to close one eye, the K4 sight instantly cut his field of view in half. It destroyed his depth perception. It created a severe case of tunnel vision. Imagine trying to hit a baseball while looking through a paper towel tube with one eye closed. Now imagine the baseball is moving at 400 miles per hour, and it is shooting back at you. It was almost impossible. Gunners would spot a German fighter. They would squint into the sight. They would try to find the plane in the tiny optical window. But by the time they focused, the enemy had already strafed them and peeled away. The system was too slow for the chaos of aerial combat. Worse, the disconnect between what the inner ear felt and what the single eye saw caused severe motion sickness. Gunners were vomiting inside their oxygen masks. It was a mess. The Army Air Force knew this. They spent millions of dollars on gunnery schools. They built simulators. They drilled these kids for months, shouting at them to trust the sight. But in the air, panic took over. Many gunners simply stopped using the expensive computer. They would look away from the sight and just spray bullets into the sky, hoping to hit something by luck. The accuracy was abysmal. The B-17s were vulnerable. The generals wanted a better computer. The engineers wanted better lenses. But the solution didn't require more budget. It didn't require a PhD in physics. It required a bored 18-year-old sergeant sitting in a garage playing with a broken piece of glass. Enter Staff Sergeant Earl Nelson. He was 18 years old. He wasn't a physicist. He didn't work for Sperry. He didn't have a degree from MIT. He was just a gunner in the 303rd Bomb Group who was tired of missing. Nelson looked at the sophisticated K4 computer site, and he didn't see a marvel of engineering. He saw a piece of junk that was getting his friends killed. He realized that in a dogfight, speed was everything. You didn't have 3 seconds to align your eye with a rubber scope. You needed to see the enemy, point the gun, and fire instantly. While the generals were writing reports about poor training, Nelson started tinkering in his spare time. He began scavenging parts. A light bulb here, a lens there, a piece of glass. He was trying to build something that barely existed at the time. He was trying to build a reflex sight. The concept was radically simple. Instead of forcing the gunner to look into a tube, Nelson wanted to project the crosshairs onto a clear piece of glass right in front of the gunner's face. Think about the difference. With the old system, you are looking through a keyhole. With Nelson's system, you are looking through a window. You keep both eyes open. You see the sky, the clouds, the formations of bombers next to you. You have full peripheral vision. And then, floating in the middle of that view, is a glowing ring of light. This was the genius of his design. It used a basic optical trick. He placed a light source and a reticle facing upward. Above it, he placed a piece of glass angled at 45 degrees. The light bounced off the glass and back into the gunner's eyes. But because the glass was semi-transparent, the gunner could look right through the reflection and see the enemy plane behind it. It created an optical illusion. To the gunner, the glowing ring wasn't on the glass. It looked like it was floating out in the sky, suspended in infinity. And here is the magic part. The part that changed everything. With the old scope, if you moved your head, you lost the target. With Nelson's mirror sight, you could bob your head up and down, left and right. The glowing ring stayed locked on the target. It was parallax-free. It meant a gunner could track a fast-moving Messerschmitt with both eyes wide open, tracking the motion naturally, just like a hunter tracking a bird. It was intuitive, it was fast, and it was built out of scrap metal. Nelson called it the G-sight. He had solved the biggest problem in aerial gunnery with a gadget that cost about $5 to make. But having a great idea in the military is dangerous. The Army runs on regulations. Every screw, every bolt, every procedure is standardized. You don't just walk up to a B-17 bomber and start gluing mirrors to the hull. Nelson had the solution, but now he had to convince the officers that his homemade toy was better than the million-dollar technology stamped with the seal of the U.S. government. In the military, there is a book for everything. A manual for how to walk, how to salute, and how to maintain a B-17 bomber. Nowhere in that book does it say, rip out the expensive electronics and replace them with a wooden box you made in the shed. When Nelson first proposed his idea, the reaction was predictable. Officers looked at him like he had lost his mind. You have to understand the culture. The K4 site was the pride of the Air Force. It was classified technology. It was expensive. Messing with it wasn't just against the rules, it was practically treason. But Nelson was persistent. He didn't just have a drawing, he built a prototype. It looked ridiculous. It was a crude metal frame, a light bulb, a lens, and a piece of glass. It looked like a high school science project. He took it to the armament officer. Imagine the scene. A dirty, grease-stained sergeant holding this contraption, standing in front of a man responsible for millions of dollars of equipment. The officer likely said, "You want me to put that in my planes?" This is the moment where most stories end. The paperwork gets filed, the request gets denied. The soldier goes back to his bunk, but the 303rd Bomb Group was desperate. They were losing crews every week. The frustration with the Sperry site was boiling over. So the officer made a decision. He gave Nelson permission to modify one turret, but there was an unspoken threat hanging in the air. If this thing broke, if it jammed the guns, if a gunner died because he couldn't aim, it was Nelson, his head on the block. He got to work. He crawled into the ball turret. It was cramped. It smelled of hydraulic fluid and sweat. He took a screwdriver and did the unthinkable. He dismantled the mounting bracket of the K4. He disconnected the analog computer. He stripped away the heavy, over-engineered machinery that Sperry had spent years perfecting. In its place, he bolted on his simple mirror system. He wired the light bulb into the plane's electrical system. He aligned the glass. When he was done, the turret looked empty. The clutter was gone. The gunner had room to breathe. But the real test happened on the ground. A pilot climbed in. He sat in the seat. He looked through the glass. He moved his head left. The reticle stayed on target. He moved his head right. The reticle stayed on target. He opened both eyes. He could see the hangar, the runway, the mechanics walking by. For the first time, the gunner wasn't fighting the machine. The machine was an extension of his eyes. The officer gave the nod. They were going to fly with it. But a test on the ground is one thing. The sky over Germany is a different beast. In the hangar, the glass doesn't fog up. In the hangar, no one is shooting 20mm cannon shells at you. Nelson had built a better mousetrap. Now he had to see if it could catch a tiger. The mission began like any other. The B-17s formed up in their combat boxes. They climbed through the cloud layer, the air grew thin and cold. Then the call came over the intercom. "Bandits! 6 o'clock high!" A swarm of Focke-Wulf 190s dived out of the sun. Their wings lit up with cannon fire. They were aiming for the belly of the bombers, right where the ball turrets hung exposed. Inside one of those turrets sat a gunner testing Nelson, his invention. In the past, this was the moment of panic. The moment you tried to jam your eye into the rubber scope while the plane bucked like a wild horse. But this time was different. The gunner kept his head back. He kept both eyes open. He saw the German fighter diving at 400 miles per hour. He didn't see a dark tunnel. He saw the whole sky. Floating in front of him, projected on the glass, was that simple glowing orange ring. He grabbed the control handles. He spun the turret. His eyes locked onto the enemy plane. The reticle followed his gaze perfectly. No blackouts, no motion sickness, no complicated math. He just put the ring on the nose of the enemy fighter, led him slightly, and squeezed the triggers. The twin .50 calibers roared. Tracers streamed out, passing right through the center of the optical ring. They smashed into the German fighter's engine. The plane exploded into a fireball and spiraled down. It was fluid. It was instinctive. It was lethal. The difference was night and day. Reports began to filter back to the base. Gunners who had struggled to hit a barn door were suddenly claiming kills. And here's the statistic that stunned the command. Normally, it took a gunner about 10 combat missions to become proficient. That meant for the first 10 flights, they were basically dead weight. And since the average lifespan of a crew was only about 15 missions, most gunners died before they ever got good. With Nelson's sight, a rookie on his very first mission was shooting with the accuracy of a veteran ace. The learning curve didn't just flatten, it vanished. The numbers were impossible to ignore. In the 303rd Bomb Group, the accuracy rates didn't just improve, they tripled. Suddenly, the Sperry Corporation, His million-dollar computer looked like a paperweight. Word spread fast across the airfield. It was the World War II equivalent of a viral hit. Crews from other bomb groups started hearing rumors about the magic mirror. Mechanics began raiding the supply depots. They stole light bulbs. They cut up plexiglass. They scavenged mirrors from jeeps and bathrooms. Everyone wanted a Nelson sight. The officers who had threatened to court-martial Nelson were now writing commendations. The device was officially adopted. They rushed it into production, retrofitting planes right on the tarmac. It was a victory for common sense. But as the B-17s rained destruction down on Europe with newfound precision, the war was already shifting gears. The era of the propeller was ending, and although Nelson's mirror had saved hundreds of American lives, it was about to be swallowed by history. The war ended. The great fleets of B-17s returned home. Most of them met an unglamorous end. They were stripped of their guns, chopped into pieces, and melted down to make aluminum siding and soda cans. The Sperry Ball turrets, those claustrophobic spheres of terror, were tossed into scrap heaps. The million-dollar K-4 computers were buried in landfills. Earl Nelson went back to civilian life. He didn't become a household name like Oppenheimer or Patton. He didn't start a tech empire. He was just a soldier who saw a problem and fixed it. But if you look closely at the world today, his legacy is everywhere. Walk into a modern military base. Look at the rifle of a soldier. Look at the cockpit of an F-35 fighter jet. Look at the screen of your favorite video game. What do you see? You see a red dot floating on a piece of glass. The technology has evolved. It is digital now. It uses lasers and holography. But the core principle, the idea that you should look through the sight, not at it, keeping both eyes open to the world, that remains unchanged. The reflex sight became the standard for the entire world. The story of the B-17 mirror sight is a reminder. We live in an age of complexity. We are obsessed with algorithms, AI, and billion-dollar solutions. We tend to believe that if a machine is expensive, it must be good. If it is complicated, it must be smart. But history tells a different story. Sometimes the engineers get it wrong. Sometimes the experts are so focused on the math that they forget the human being. And sometimes, the solution to a life or death problem isn't found in a laboratory. It is found in a garage, by an 18-year-old kid with a screwdriver, a piece of broken glass, and the audacity to question the rules. So the next time you see a red dot sight, don't just think about the technology. Think about the frozen gunners over Germany, huddled in their aluminum bubbles. Think about the moment they opened both eyes. And remember that sometimes, the smartest way to look at the world is simply to look right through it.